The fog in the riven vale did not lift for kings. I had come down at first light to bring back my brother's bones, and the mist closed over my shoulders like water closing over a drowned man. Below me, the valley floor lay gray and soundless. No bird sang in it. No wind moved through it. The old wolves of Havenmore had a name for the place that they only spoke low, and the name meant the throat that swallows and gives nothing back. 3 days before, they had carried Ash down into that throat, and I had let them because that was the law, and I was the king who kept the law. Now I was breaking it, and I did not care. Let me tell you about Ash, so you understand what I was walking down to fetch, and why a king would leave his hall before the moon set to fetch it alone. He had been mine since I was a boy of 9 and he a pup half drowned in the spring melt. The river had come up fast that year, the way it does in the north, brown and cold and full of broken ice, and a litter had been swept off a bank downstream of the holding. I heard them before I saw them, that thin drowning cry a pup makes when it has stopped believing anyone is coming, and I went into the water after them though I could barely swim, and I came out with one. Just one. A gray scrap of a thing, all bone and enormous paws, so cold it did not even shiver. I put it inside my shirt against my own skin, and I ran home, and I would not let the healers take it. And by morning it had warmed and it had lived, and it had decided in the way of wolves that I belonged to it. I pulled Ash from the water before I ever pulled a sword. Remember that. It matters to the end of this. For 30 years he walked at my left side, through every hall and every winter and every campaign. He was there when my father died and the crown came to me too young and too hard, and he lay across the foot of my bed the nights I could not carry it, and he was there in the gray mornings when I rose and carried it anyway. He grew old the way great wolves do, slowly, and then, near the end, all at once. His muzzle went gray. His hips stiffened in the cold. But his eyes stayed clear and his heart stayed a young wolf's heart. And when the raiders came over the North Ridge that last week of autumn, it was Ash, old Ash, gray Ash, Ash who slept by my fire and dreamed with his paws twitching, who put himself between their spears and my youngest riders. There were 3 of them, boys really, not yet 20, caught out on the ridge road when the raiders broke through. They should have died there. They would have died there. But a gray shape came out of the dark faster than anything that old had a right to move, and it took the spear thrust meant for the smallest of them full in the ribs, and it did not stop even then. It drove the man back down the slope with its jaws in his arm until my riders reached them, and the ridge was ours again. He did not die that night. He did worse than die. He lingered. They brought him to me on a litter of cloaks, and the wound in his side was laid open to the bone, and he was breathing wet and slow, that terrible slow bubbling breath, and his eye found me the way it had always found me, across every hall, and there was no fear in it. Only a question. Is this all right? Did I do it right? And I knelt by him on the cold stone of my own hall, and I could not answer, because the healers were behind me shaking their heads, and my steward was standing very still with his hands folded, waiting to say the thing that stewards must say to kings. "He is too far gone, my king," Orrin said at last low. Orrin had served my father before me. He did not enjoy the saying of it. The wound is mortal. It is only a question now of how long and of how much he suffers in the going. You know the law. You wrote half of it yourself. A pause, gentle, terrible. We carry the mortally wounded down to the vale, so the pack is not made to watch its own die by inches. It is a mercy. It has always been a mercy. I knew the law. I had kept it a dozen times. I had stood at the top of the ridge and watched the litter bearers go down into the fog with some old warrior or some ruined hunter, and I had told the grieving that it was kinder this way, that no creature should have to die under the eyes of the whole pack, that the veil took them quietly, and that was better than the long watching. I had believed it. It is a comfortable thing to believe, that the place you send your grief is a place of peace. So I let them carry him down. God forgive me, I stood at the top of the path in the gray autumn light, and I let 4 men lift my brother on a litter and walk him down into the throat of the valley, and his eye found me over the edge of the cloak, that same question in it, is this all right? And I did not go with him, because kings keep the law, and I turned away before the fog took him because I could not watch him go. 3 nights I did not sleep. I have not before or since spent 3 worse nights. I lay in the dark and I heard that wet slow breathing where there was no breathing. I saw his eye. I got up on the second night and stood at the window that looks toward the ridge, and I told myself he was surely already gone, that it had been quick, that the cold and the wound had done their work in a night, and I did not believe one word of it. I knew Ash. I had pulled him from a river that meant to kill him when he was too small to have any business living, and he had lived out of sheer stubborn love. He would not die quick. He would lie down in the fog and he would hold on, hold on, hold on, waiting, because that is what he had always done, waiting for me to come. On the third night, I stopped lying to myself. I rose before the moon set. I took no guard and no torch and no litter bearers. I took a cloak and a knife in my own 2 hands, the hands that had pulled him from the water, and I went down alone into the vale to bring up whatever was left of my brother. A skull, perhaps. The long gray bones. Something I could carry up the ridge and burn where the pack could see it, where he could see it, so that he did not lie forgotten in the throat of a place we were all too afraid to enter. Let the law take my crown for it. A king who would not go down for the one who went down for him was no king I wanted to wear a crown as. The path was old and half lost, grown over with the gray creeping things that grow where the sun does not come. I went by memory and by the pull of grief, which knows its own way down. The fog thickened as I descended until I could see no more than a few paces, and the sound of my own boots died in it, swallowed, and I understood then why the old wolves called it the throat. It was not the cold, it was the silence. A silence that ate sound, that ate footsteps and breath, and the small brave noises a man makes to keep himself company in the dark, until there was nothing left but the fog and the gray and the enormous quiet, and me alone in the middle of it, going down. And then, as I came down into the flat gray heart of the vale, into the place where the fog lay on the ground like a second earth laid over the first, I began to hear something I had no name for. Breathing. Not my own, slower than mine, deep and even and alive, the great bellows breath of a wolf at rest, the sound I had fallen asleep to 10,000 nights of my life. I stopped where I stood. My heart went hard and wrong in my chest. I told myself it was some other beast, some scavenger drawn to the valley's easy dead. I told myself it could not be, that grief was making me hear the thing I most wanted to hear, that this was how the fog took men. It gave them back their dead in sounds and let them chase the sounds until they were lost. I told myself all of it in the space of a breath, and then the fog thinned before me the way a curtain lifts in a draught, and I saw them, and every word I had told myself blew away like smoke. She sat on the cold ground with her back against a fallen stone, and Ash lay along the whole length of her, his great head heavy in her lap, and she had one hand resting in the fur between his ears the way you rest a hand on something you have watched over a long time and grown easy with. His flank rose and fell, rose and fell. The wound along his ribs, the wound I had seen open to the bone, the wound the healers had called mortal, was closed. Stitched fine and dark and even, packed with something green and pungent that I could smell even through the fog, a clean bitter herb smell in all that gray nothing. He was thin. His gray coat was dull, but he was breathing, deep and slow and easy, and he had been breathing down here for 3 days in the throat that swallows and gives nothing back, because someone had gone down into it and refused to let it take him. I have stood before enemy kings and not lost my footing. I have held a line when braver men broke. I lost it there. My knees went out from under me and I was down in the wet grass before I had decided to kneel, and the sound that came out of me was not a king's sound. It was the sound a man makes when a grief he has carried 3 days is lifted off him all at once, and the lifting nearly breaks him worse than the weight. She looked up. I want to tell you what happened to me then, and I find, even now, an old man telling it, that I do not have the ordinary words. For 3 days I had been carrying a cold. Not the cold of the fog, a real cold, in the exact center of my chest, where the losing of ash had frozen something solid. Some warm, working thing I had never once had cause to think about until it iced over, and I felt every beat of my heart drag against the ice of it. When her eyes came up and met mine, that cold did not melt slowly. It stopped. All at once, the way an ache stops the instant a broken bone is set true, so that for a moment you feel not pain and not relief, but only a vast startling quiet where the hurt had been, and you have to learn all over again how to stand up in a body that does not hurt. And behind the quiet, feeling came flooding back into me the way feeling comes flooding back into a hand you had thought long dead of frost. All at once, sharp to the point of agony, almost more than the body can hold. I knew her. I had never seen her face in the whole of my life, and I knew her the way I knew my own name, not as a fact I had learned, but as a thing that had always been true and was only now being spoken aloud. "He was too strong to die where you left him," she said. Her voice was low and unhurried, a voice worn smooth by years of speaking softly to things in pain, the kind of voice that does not startle a wounded animal or a grieving man. She did not seem afraid of me, though she surely knew what I was. No soul in Havonmore could fail to know the Alpha King, and I had come down cloaked and armed and shaking in the gray light like a man half out of his mind, which I suppose I was. She looked at me the way she might look at any creature that had come into the vale carrying more hurt than it could hold, steadily, without flinching, as though grieving kings arrived at her fog-drowned door every morning of the world and she had learned long ago how to receive them. "But he's not strong enough yet to climb out," she went on. "Another few days. The wound's closing clean, but he's lost too much of himself to make that path. You'll have to be patient." Patient, as though I had not spent 3 nights grinding my teeth to powder, as though I were a boy who wanted a thing too soon. My voice would not work properly. Ash's tail moved against her leg, a slow, heavy sweep, and he did not lift his head. He had not the strength, but his old amber eye found me across the little space between us and held me, and I saw that he was not afraid and that he had chosen this lap to lay his head in and that he was, in his exhausted, wolfish way, deeply and enormously content. "You've been down here," I managed. 3 days, alone, in the Vale." "Longer than 3 days," she said. "Not with him, with the others." "What others?" She was quiet a moment, and something moved across her face that I would come to know very well in the years after, the flicker of a person deciding how much of a truth another person is ready to be handed all at once. Then she reached beside her, careful not to disturb Ash, and drew back a fold of the ragged wool she had been sitting on, and I saw that it was not bare ground she sat upon at all but a low bed of woven bracken and dried moss, made, tended, laid down with purpose. And that there were others of them further off, dim shapes in the fog, little nests, shelters of a kind, low and rough and cunningly banked against the cold, and curled in the nearest, watching me with its ears flat and its lip half lifted in a warning it was far too weak to mean, was a young pack wolf I knew. I knew it, a yearling dark-pelted that had gone into the vale at the turn of autumn with its hind leg crushed under a fallen tree. I had been there when they found it, had seen the leg, had known there was nothing to be done. It had been carried down. It had been mourned. Its mother, one of the old gray she-wolves of the West Pack, had grieved it, and its name had been spoken among the winter's lost. It was not lost. It was here. It was watching me with a young wolf's suspicion, and it was standing, 3-legged, favoring the mended one, but standing, and the leg that should have been a ruin was set and splinted and healing straight. "How many?" I said. My voice had gone strange. "This winter." She looked out into the gray, and I watched her count them in her mind, and I understood that each one had a place in her memory, that she did not think of them as a number. 9 that lived, that will live now if they mend the rest of the way. I think all 9 will, and 4 that didn't. She said the 4 as plainly as the 9, with no more weight and no less. I sat with those so they wouldn't go alone. "The pack sends the broken ones down here to die because they can't bear to watch them go. I understand that. I've never blamed anyone for it." Her hand moved again in Ash's fur, gentle, unthinking, the way a mother's hand moves. But no one ever came down afterward, to see whether they actually did, to close the wound that might have closed, to hold the ones that couldn't be saved so they didn't die in the cold with no hand on them at all. Everyone stopped at the top of the ridge. Everyone always has. No one ever came down. The words went into me the way a good blade goes in clean, without pain at first, only the cold certain knowledge of how deep it had gone and that the pain was coming. For as long as anyone in Havonmore could remember, the Vale had been the place we sent our grief so we would not have to keep it in the house. The mercy, we called it, the kind law, and all that time, the whole long, silent, shameful time, someone had been going down into it. Someone had been kneeling in the throat of the place we all feared to enter, in the cold and the fog and the terrible aloneness, closing the wounds we would not look at, and sitting through the last breaths of the ones past saving so that no creature of ours should die untouched. While I stood at the top of the ridge and told grieving families it was kinder this way. And I had let the pack call her cursed for it. Because I knew her now, not her face. I had told the truth, I had never once seen it, but her name and the shape the name made in the mouths of my people. Neve, the healer's girl who lived at the low edge of the holding, past the last house, where the ground begins its long slope down toward the Vale. The one the mothers drew their pups back from in the market. The one they said walked into death and came out again. And what sort of soul does that? And best not to meet her eye too long lest whatever follows her home should notice you. I had heard it. In the passing way a king hears the thousand small murmurs of his people. I had heard it, and I had not stopped it. And I will tell you the true reason I had not stopped it. Because I mean to be honest about all of it, even the parts that shame me. I had believed it, not loudly, not in words I would have said aloud, but in the lazy, unexamined back of my mind where a man keeps the beliefs he has never troubled to look at. I had thought, where there is that much smoke, there is surely some fire. A girl who walks into the Death Valley and comes out. A girl the pack fears. There is probably something to it. And I had gone on to the next of my 10,000 daily concerns and never looked at the belief again. There was something to it. There was this. There was the truest heart in my whole kingdom, sitting in the cold with my dying brother's head in her lap, and every soul I ruled had crossed the road to keep from walking in her shadow, and their king had let them, because it was easier to half believe a frightened rumor than to walk down one time and see. "What is your name?" I said, though I knew it. I think I needed her to give it to me with her own mouth. I think I needed to be given something by her, to begin to set right the great debt I could already feel opening under me like the valley floor. "Neve," she said. Neve. I had never spoken a single word and felt it settle so wholly into place, like a keystone lowered at last into the gap it was cut for, that the whole arch has been waiting on. "I am Varen. I know who you are." The corner of her mouth moved not a smile, but the ghost of the country where one might live. "You're the man who left this one to die." She looked down at Ash, and her voice when she went on had no accusation in it at all, which was somehow far worse than if it had been full of blame. "And then couldn't." "No," I said, "I couldn't." We were quiet then, she and I. In the soundless heart of the Vale, with the fog moving slow around us and my oldest friend breathing easy between us, alive against all law and all sense because a shunned girl had refused to let the sentence stand. I looked at her hands. They were chapped raw from the cold and the work, the knuckles cracked, the nails broken short, a healed white line laid across the back of one where something frightened had bitten her once and she had, I did not doubt, gone on with what she was doing. They were the most beautiful hands I had ever seen. I did not understand the feeling and I did not question it. When a thing has been true since before you drew breath, you do not stand about in the fog demanding it show you its papers. "You should not be down here either," she said at last, practical, as though she had not just rearranged the whole architecture of my life. "The path floods when the fog lifts, the melt comes off the high stones, and there's an hour, sometimes two, when it isn't safe. And you look like a man who hasn't slept in a week." 3 days. "Then you're a fool," she said, not unkindly, as well as a king, and I haven't the strength to carry 2 grown wolves and a king up out of this valley, so one of you will have to walk out on his own feet, and it isn't going to be him." She eased Ash's head from her lap slow, murmuring to him low in a language that was not words, and he let her who let no one but me lay a hand on him, and I watched my brother turn his great gray head and press his nose once, deliberately, into her open palm before he let it go. A thanks, a benediction, and I understood, kneeling there, that I was not the first heart in this valley Ash had chosen, only the last of us to arrive. I did not carry Ash out that day. She was right. He could not yet make the climb, and to have forced him would have finished what the wound and the cold had failed to. So I did a thing no Alpha King of Havenmore had done in the memory of the pack, in the memory of the pack. I stayed down in the vale. I sent no word up the ridge. Let them wonder. Let them think the throat had swallowed their king too. I sat where she told me to sit, and I did what she told me to do, which was mostly to be still, and to let Ash rest against my side and take warmth from me, and to keep my own hands wrapped around a wooden bowl of the bitter tea she brewed over a fire so small and so carefully banked that no watcher on the ridge above would ever catch a wisp of its smoke. She had thought of that. Of course she had thought of that. She had thought of everything down here, the drainage of the little shelters so the melt would not flood the wolves as they slept, the windbreak of piled stone, the herbs dried and hung in an old fowler's bag against the damp, the fire that gave heat without giving her away. She had built a whole quiet mercy in the throat of the dark and told no living soul and asked for nothing, and taken in exchange only the name cursed and the sight of her own people stepping off the path to avoid her. Years of it, all of it alone. Through that first long gray day, as Ash slept and mended against my side, she moved among the others and let me watch. The dark yearling with the mended leg, she called it none of the pack's names, but had her own soft names for all of them, and this one she called Thistle, for the way it had snapped and bristled at her the first days before it understood. An old one-eyed hunter, rib stove in by the same fall of stone that had crushed Thistle's leg, breathing shallow but breathing, that the pack had given up in the same hour. A young she-wolf, heavy with pups that had been driven out, not carried, driven, cast out by a rival for reasons of pack politics, I did not ask her to explain, and had come down into the vale herself, following some instinct that in that place at least no one would pursue her. 3 others further in the fog that I did not meet that first day, and she went to each of them and knelt and spoke low and looked at the wounds and changed the packing, and did the patient unglamorous work of keeping a broken thing alive, and the wolves that would have taken the hand off a strange king turned their faces to her and were still. "How did you learn it?" I asked her, when the gray light was beginning to fail and the fog had turned from gray to the deep blue of coming night, and Ash slept between us at last with his breath fully easy. "All of this. The stitching, the herbs, the way they let you near." "My mother," she said. And she told me. I did not ask her to. She gave it to me, there in the blue dark, over the little fire, and I have kept every word of it since, like a man keeps the one letter that changed his life. Her mother had been the one who carried them down. It had been her task in the years before the last kindness the pack called the office, the walking of the broken ones down the ridge path to the vale. It was thought an honor of a sad kind, given to a gentle soul, and her mother had been the gentlest soul in the holding, and so it had fallen to her year on year. And she had hated it, not the walking, the leaving. She used to come back up the path with the empty litter and go into her house and not speak for a day. And small Neve would sit outside the door and wait for the day to pass and her mother to come back into the world. One winter, Neve said, turning a twig slowly in the little fire, she went down with an old blind wolf that everyone had given up. Gray Fen, they called him. He'd been a great hunter once, but he was old and his eyes had gone milk white and he'd stopped eating, and the pack said it was his time, and my mother was told to carry him down. And she was gone too long, longer than the carrying should have taken. My father grew afraid and went down the path after her. The twig turned. He found her sitting in the fog with old Fen's head in her lap, and Fen was alive. She'd stayed. She hadn't been able to make herself leave him, and she'd stayed and warmed him and coaxed a little water into him and sat through the night. And by morning the old wolf had come back to himself, was lifting his head, was taking food from her hand. He'd only been dying of being left, you see, of the cold and the alone, and once he wasn't left, he stopped. She looked at me across the fire. She carried him back up the path in her arms. My father tried to stop her, not out of cruelty, out of fear of what people would say, but she wouldn't be stopped. And the whole holding recoiled from her as if she'd carried up a corpse, as if she'd walked into death and death had followed her home on her heels. That was the word that started it. She went into the veil and something came back with her. Old Fen lived 2 more years by our fire and was gentle as a lamb and never harmed a soul, and it made no difference at all. My mother was never the last kindness again after that day. She was the cursed one. The mothers pulled their children back from her. And Neve's voice did not break, but it went very quiet, very level, the way a voice goes when the person has decided long ago not to weep about a thing and has held to the decision. She went down anyway, every winter. Whatever they called her, she could not do it any other way. It was not in her to leave a thing to die of being left. Until the winter she went down and the path flooded behind her and she didn't come back up. And I was 14 and old enough by then to go down in her place. So I did. The fire made a small, warm coin of light on her face, and I could have looked at that face until the mountains of the north wore down to sand. "Why?" I said. It came out of me rough. "Why do you keep doing it? They fear you for it. They'd love you if you stopped. You could walk up that path tonight and never come down again and be a healer with a house and a hearth and a place in the market. And instead you sit in the throat of the valley closing wounds that no one will ever thank you for, taking their fear for wages. Why?" She was a long time answering. When she did, there was no self-pity in it at all, only a clear, settled, terrible certainty that undid me more completely than any weeping could have. "Somebody has to go down after them, Varen. Somebody has to. If not me, then no one, because there's no one else who will, and there hasn't been since my mother. And it might as well be the one they've already decided to be afraid of." She looked back into the fire. "It costs me nothing more than I've already paid. I was already alone. The fear was already there. I can't be shunned any harder than I already am, so I'm the cheapest person in the whole holding to spend on this. That's not sad. It's only true. My mother taught me that a thing you can't be talked out of isn't a burden. It's just the shape of you." A pause. "I'd rather be the shape I am than warm and loved, and stopping at the top of the ridge with everyone else. I was already alone. I have gone to war over lesser wounds than the ones." Those 4 words opened in me. I did not sleep that night, though I was more tired than I had ever been in my life. I sat with my back against the fallen stone and my dying not dying brother against my legs and this woman, a little apart from me in the blue dark, and I kept a slow vigil over the fact of her. Over the mountain moving quiet in the middle of my chest where 3 days of cold had lived, and now something else lived instead. I thought about my kingdom, sleeping up there on the ridge, and about the 1,000 small murmurs I heard and let pass, and about how many of them, over how many years, had been the sound of my people being cruel to the best of themselves. And somewhere in that long night, watching the fire burn down to a red eye and her breathing go slow, and even in the dark, I made a decision that a wiser king might have taken longer to make, and that I have never once, from that hour to this, regretted. She woke before the light, the way she woke every morning of her life, without any fuss, already reaching for the herbs. I watched her go to each of the wolves in the gray pre-dawn and check them, one by one, and I got up stiff and cold and I went with her, and I held what she told me to hold and fetched what she told me to fetch. And when the pregnant she-wolf grew restless, she showed me how to lay my hand flat against its side and be still, and let it feel the size and steadiness of me, and take calm from it. A king who had commanded armies, learning from a shunned girl how to make a frightened animal unafraid. "You're not bad at it," she allowed, watching, "for a man who left his own to die." "I'm never going to stop hearing that, am I?" "No," she said, and there was, for the first time, something almost like warmth under the dryness. but I'll say it more kindly as we go. As we go, I held on to those two words like a rope. We were 4 days more in the Vale, all told. Ash grew stronger by hard degrees, could hold his head up, then could stand, swaying, then could take a few steps and lie down trembling, then could walk the little circuit of the shelters at Neve's side while she made her rounds, an old gray shadow following a young one. On the second day the old one-eyed hunter, Fenn's kin I think, took a turn for the worse in the night, and I woke to find her sitting with it in the dark, her hand on its ribs, singing very low, not words, a tune with no words, the tune I imagine her mother sang, and her mother's mother, and I understood that this was the other half of the work, the half no one ever saw. The 9 who lived were the half people might have forgiven her for if they had known. The 4 who died in her arms, sung down into the dark so they would not go alone, that was the half that was pure gift, given to creatures who could not thank her, witnessed by no one, done in the cold for nothing but that it should not go undone. The old hunter did not die that night. It rallied by dawn, but I had seen her ready to lose it and ready to hold it while it went, and I do not think I have ever loved anything the way I loved her watching her be ready for that. By the 4th day Ash could climb. We went up slowly, me on one side of him and Neve on the other, and the old wolf leaning his weight now into her and now into me, and behind us, because they would not be left, because in 4 days they had bound themselves to her past any hope of unbinding, came the others. Thistle limping game and stubborn on the mended leg. The one-eyed hunter slow, its stove ribs bound. The pregnant she-wolf heavy and careful. The 3 from deeper in the fog, gaunt and wary and following all the same. 9 wolves the pack had counted among the dead, climbing up out of the throat of the valley into the light, and Neve walking among them with a hand on this one's shoulder and a low word for that one. And they moved around her the way water moves around a stone. It has known so long it has forgotten the stone was ever a stranger. I walked at the back of the little procession and watched her, and I thought, with a clarity that has never once left me, my whole kingdom calls this a curse. We came up over the last rise into the low gray light of a winter afternoon, and the whole of Havonmore was there. They had known, of course. 4 days without their king, the ridge is not so far and a king is not so easily lost. Some part of the pack had come to the top of the path every one of those days and looked down into the fog and not dared to follow, and today the whole holding was gathered. Orrin, my steward, at the front, his old face the gray of a man who has watched a law break and does not know yet whether to mourn it. The mothers with their pups held tight against their skirts, the riders, the elders, the market folk, the whole of my people pressed together in one great uneasy crowd, hungry and frightened for the sight of me. And they saw me come up out of the vale that no wolf returns from. And behind me they saw the wolves that no wolf returns from returning. 9 of them. The mourned, the counted lost, the given up. Old gray Ash at their head with his ribs stitched fine and his amber eye bright and his tail up. And among them, one hand resting on my brother's shoulder, her worn cloak gray with valley damp and her chapped hands bare to the cold, came the girl they had crossed the road to avoid all her life. The silence that fell was the deepest I have ever heard, and I have heard the silence that comes down over a field after a battle, when the crows have not yet found their courage. Orrin found his voice first, as a good steward must. My king. His eyes went from me to the living wolves to Neve and back to me, and I watched the whole understanding arrive in him, and I watched it hurt him, honestly and deeply, the way the truth hurts a decent man who has been half asleep inside a comfortable lie. These are the ones we. The ones you gave to the Vale, I said. I did not raise my voice. In that silence there was no need. A whisper would have carried to the back of the crowd. The broken ones, the mercy dead, the ones we carried down so that we would not have to stand up here and watch them die. I let it sit in the cold air a moment. They did not die. For years they did not die, not all of them, not the ones that could be saved and not alone, even the ones that couldn't. Every winter, while we stood at the top of this ridge and grieved and told each other there was nothing to be done and called it mercy, someone went down into the throat of that valley and did the thing that could be done, closed the wounds we would not look at, set the bones, Sat through the last night of the ones past saving so that no creature of ours went into the dark with no hand on it. I turned then, slowly, and I held out my hand to her, palm up, open, in front of the whole of my gathered people. Heard. I felt the mark before I saw it. As my palm opened toward her, a warmth came up in it, sudden, sweet and deep, spreading from the exact center of my hand up the inside of my wrist like warm water finding its level. I looked down, and I watched its surface in my own skin, rising up through the flesh of my palm, the way a shape rises up through still water toward the light. The old blood sign, the mate mark, the mark my father had worn and his father before him, curling and pale and unmistakable, the mark that wakes in an alpha king of Havenmore for one soul in all the living world, and no other ever in his whole life. It had never once stirred in me. I had ruled 12 years and taken no Luna. The council had pressed me and then despaired of me. They had brought me daughters of every allied pack, and I had been courteous and I had felt nothing, because the mark stayed dead in my hand, and a king of my line does not take a Luna his blood does not name, and mine named no one. I had made my private peace, in the cold gray back of my heart, with a solitary crown and a line that would pass to some nephew. I had stopped expecting the warmth. I had, if I am honest, stopped believing in it, had come to think it a pretty story the old ones told, that a mark could know a heart. It was awake now. It was blazing now, warm and bright against the winter cold. And when I lifted my eyes from my own hand, I saw the same warmth breaking across the back of Neve's chapped, work-cracked hand, the twin of my mark, pale and curling and unmistakable, surfacing in her skin, answering mine across the little space of gray air between us like one bell answering another. She stared at it, and for the first time since I had come upon her in the fog, the deep, steady certainty went out of her face, and under it I saw at last how young she truly was, and how tired, and how many winters she had gone without one single soul reaching out a hand toward her that was not asking her to hold death for it. Her fingers curled slowly inward over the waking mark, as if to hide it, or shield it, or make certain it was real and would not vanish when she blinked. "That's," she said, and could not finish it. "Yes," I said. "That can't." She looked up at me, and her voice dropped so low that only I could catch it, and it broke for the first time in all of this on the smallest word. "I'm the cursed one, Varen, you can't. They'll never." "They'll bow," I said. "Watch." And I turned to my people. I did not decree it. A decree they could have resented, could have obeyed with their mouths and hated in their hearts, and I did not want obedience. I wanted them to see. So I told them the count. I stood at the top of the ridge with the fog at my back and my mate's mark warm on my hand, and I told the whole of Havenmore exactly what she had done, plainly, without ornament, the way she had told it to me over the little fire in the dark. 9 wolves this winter. For the winter before that had died with her hand on them, and her voice singing them down so that they did not die alone in the cold. I named Thistle, and pointed to it standing there whole on the leg the pack had wept over as lost, and I watched Thistle's mother, the old gray she-wolf of the West Pack, come to the front of the crowd on stiff legs and stare at her son and put her hand over her own mouth. I told them of the one-eyed hunter, and the driven-out she-wolf and her unborn pups, and the 3 from the deep fog, and I told them of Ash. Ash, whom every soul on that ridge knew I loved past all sense, whom half of them had watched carried down 4 days before on a litter with the wound laid open to the bone, Ash, standing there now at her side with his ribs stitched, and his eye bright, alive, 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 when the law of our own making had left him in the throat of the valley to die of the cold and the alone. And I watched it land in them. One by one, face by face, I watched the fear curdle into something far more useful, which was shame, a deep, hot, honest shame, and then I watched the shame turn in the better ones into something better still, which was awe. It was the old gray mother who moved first, Thistle's mother. She came forward through the parting crowd and stopped before Neve and looked at her a long moment, and then she looked down at her son standing whole on his mended leg, and her face crumpled the way an old strong face crumples, all at once and without dignity and without shame, and she went down. Not the shallow courteous bow one gives a king across a hall. All the way. Both knees to the cold hard ground of the ridge, her gray head bowed low. The deep obeisance my people give only to the Luna and to the honored dead. And behind her, Orin went down. My steward, who had served 2 kings, who had told me it was mercy to carry them into the fog, lowered himself stiff and slow to both knees in front of the girl he had helped make a curse of, and I saw the tears standing bright in his old eyes, and I loved him for not hiding them. And behind Orin the crowd went, in a long slow wave from the front of them to the back, the whole of Havonmore going down onto the cold ground, the mothers who had pulled their pups from her shadow, the elders who had let her mother die alone in a flooded valley and let the daughter take up the same freezing road at 14, the market folk who had stepped off the path, every soul who had crossed the street from the truest heart among them. Down, down, in a spreading wave of bowed heads and bent knees, until Neve stood alone and upright in the exact center of a bowing kingdom, with my mark blazing warm on her hand, and no idea in all the world what to do with her own face. "I told you," I said quietly only to her. "You're impossible," she whispered, and she was almost laughing and almost weeping, both at once and neither, and old Ash leaned his great gray weight against her legs as if to hold her up, and I thought my heart would simply stop in my chest at the sight of the 3 of us on that ridge. I did not make her my Luna that day. I am telling you the whole truth of it, and the whole truth is that I asked her quietly later, when the crowd had risen and dispersed into their stunned and murmuring quiet, and we sat at last by a proper fire in my own hall, the first proper fire and the first proper hall of her whole cold life, with Ash stretched full length and snoring on the warm stone between us. I asked her to stand beside me and be crowned, and she said no. Not to me. She was careful to be clear about that, watching my face, quick to be kind even in the refusing. Not to me, to the crown. "I don't know how to be that," she said. "I know how to sit in a cold valley with a dying thing and not be afraid. I don't know how to stand in a warm hall full of people and be looked at and be loved. I'm not certain I'd survive it, Varen. It's a stranger country to me than the Vale ever was. I know every stone of that valley. I don't know a single thing about this." She looked at the fire and then at Ash and then, briefly, shyly at me. "Give me the low house I've always had. Let me be what I know how to be for a while. Don't put a crown on someone who's still learning how to be looked at kindly, or you'll break her, and it won't be anyone's fault, and we'll both be sorry." So I did not make her my Luna that day. I made her something first that mattered a great deal more, and that she had never in her life been given by anyone but a dying wolf and a dead mother. I made her welcome. I gave her the low house past the last house, where she had always lived, and I did not move her out of it. I moved myself down toward it. I spent my evenings at her small hearth, learning the names of her salves and the uses of her herbs, holding the wolves while she worked on them, walking with her the first time she went back down into the Vale after all of it, and the second time, and the 10th, until the pack grew slowly used to the sight of their king coming up out of the throat of the valley at the healer's side with a mending wolf or 2 at their heels. I learned the path in every season. I learned which hour the melt came and how long you had before it flooded, the hour that had taken her mother, that I would not let take her. And season on season, as I walked it beside her, the meaning of the place changed under our feet. The Vale stopped being the word my people spoke low for the throat that swallowed their grief, and became, slowly, without anyone quite deciding it, the place we went down into together to bring the grief back up. She taught me patience, which she had accused me of lacking in the first hour of the first day, and in which accusation she had been entirely right. I had wanted everything set right at once, her crowned, the pack forgiven, the debt paid, the whole crooked thing made straight in a single grand stroke, because that is how kings are used to fixing things, and because I could not bear the slowness of a wound healing when I could see so plainly how it ought to end. She taught me the other way. The way of the closed wound and the changed packing and the patient waiting, the small daily mending that cannot be hurried and cannot be commanded and comes right only by being tended, tended, tended. She had learned it in the hardest school there is, kneeling alone in the cold over things that would die if she grew impatient. She was a good teacher. I was, after a while, not the worst of students. Orrin came to her that first spring, alone, and knelt again in the low house, and asked her forgiveness for the mercy he had helped make of her. She gave it before he had finished asking. She was like that. She had no store of grievance in her at all. I think there was simply no room, all of her taken up with the tending. And she forgave the whole holding so completely, and so without ceremony that the holding hardly knew how to receive it and had to learn, awkwardly, over a year, how to be forgiven by someone it had wronged. It was a full turn of the year, a whole year of the low house, and the evenings at the small hearth, and the walks down into the vale, and the slow learning of how to be looked at kindly, before she stood beside me on the ridge of her own choosing and let the pack name her Luna. And by then it was no reversal at all. There was no stunned bowing crowd, no scorners eating their words in a great dramatic hour. All of that had long since happened, quietly, spread out over 100 ordinary days, the way real changes of heart actually happen. It was only Havonmore come out in the spring light to see made plain at last the thing the whole holding had long since understood. Thistle's mother stood at the very front, with Thistle grown and sound beside her. Orrin wept openly and did not care who saw, being by then a man who had made a kind of peace with his own old blindness. And Neve, when she took the vow, did not speak of thrones or of destiny or of the mark that had named her. She spoke because she was who she was, and could be no one else even in her own crowning. She spoke the names of the 4 wolves that had died in her arms in the winters before, one by one, so that even at the top of the ridge, even with the crown coming down onto her head, she would not go up out of the valley and leave a single one of them behind in the telling. That is who I chose. That is who chose me, though it took her the better part of a year to believe she was allowed to have been chosen, and longer than that to stop flinching, just slightly, the first instant anyone reached a hand toward her, before she remembered that the hands reached toward her now to hold and not to push away. Ash lived 4 more winters after the veil. The healers said it was not possible. A wolf that old, that far gone, brought up from a mortal wound in the throat of the Death Valley, he should have had a season, perhaps, a gentle fatting. He had 4 winters. 4 good winters, gray and stiff in the hips and slow on the stairs but bright-eyed to the last, dreaming by our fire with his paws twitching, walking the vale path beside the 2 of us in the good weather, laying his great head in Neve's lap of an evening the way he had laid it in the fog the day I found them, as if to remind us both, now and again, where all of this had begun. I stopped, after a while, trying to explain to people how he had lived so long. The true explanation was only ever her, and when I said so, they thought I was being sentimental, when in fact I was being precise. When he did go at last, he was old past any counting, warm by our own hearth on a soft night in the spring. He did not go to the vale. No creature of Havonmore has been carried down into that valley to die alone in the whole long remainder of my reign, and none ever will be again while there is breath in me to forbid it, because we go down now, all of us, and we bring them back up, the ones that can be saved, and the ones that can't we hold and sing down where it is warm in the light, with hands on them. The throat that swallowed and gave nothing back gives them back now. Everyone. Because a girl I found in the fog with my dying brother's head in her lap would not accept, would not ever accept, that any wounded thing should be left to die of being left. He went with both our hands on him. Mine, that had pulled him from a river 70 years before, when he was a drowning scrap of gray too small to know how to live. And hers, that had pulled him back from the throat of the vale when he was too old and too broken to do anything but wait in the cold, holding on, holding on, holding on for me to come. And I did come. Late and frightened, and breaking the law to do it, but I came, and I found him, and I found her, and I have understood ever since that he held on those 3 days in the fog not only for me, but for the pure stubborn love that had gone into the water after him, and would not, at the end of everything, leave him where no one would come. I am king of a great many things, halls and ridges and rivers and the hard, fierce loyalty of a hard northern people. When I am an old man, older than I am now, and I am not young, and they ask me, as they will, what I was proudest of in all my reign, I will not name the wars I won, or the borders I held, or the laws I kept. I will tell them I broke one law once that deserved breaking, that I went down alone into the valley no wolf returns from at first light, to bring back the bones of the one I loved best in the world, that I found him breathing, that I found, kneeling in the fog with his gray head in her lap, the truest heart in my whole kingdom, whom my whole kingdom had cast out, and that I came up out of the throat of that place carrying not the grief I had gone down for, but the whole warm remainder of my life. She is beside me as I tell it. Her hand is in mine, the marked hand, the chapped hand, the most beautiful hand I have ever held. And when I falter over the ending, over old ash, over the going down and the coming up, she does what she has always done. She finishes it for me, softly, the way she finished my first broken sentence in the fog all those winters ago. He was too strong, she says, to die where you left him. And every time it is true.